All right. Continuing on with our outstanding guest speaker series, today the TMCC Library Open Genealogy Lab is proud to welcome back professional genealogist Lisa Dougherty. Lisa has been active in tracing the history of not only her own family, but many others for over 25 years. A native of upstate New York, she became interested in genealogy as a teenager when her father began investigating the origins of his Irish great-grandparents. Great grandparents. Thank you. A former volunteer at the National Archives in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, she spent many years pre-COVID volunteering to help hundreds of family historians at local libraries, including the Irish American Heritage Museum in Albany, New York. She is a member of the Association of Professional Genealogists, as well as several area genealogical groups. A longtime subscriber to Ancestry.com, she specializes in online research and the effective use of websites to investigate family history. She resides in Guilderland, New York, with her husband and teenage son. For more information, please visit her website at www.upstatenewyork.nygenealogy.com or like her Facebook page, Upstate New York Genealogy by Lisa Dougherty. Irish genealogy is her favorite topic, and helping you discover your Irish ancestors is her top priority. So with that, I'd like to offer a warm virtual welcome to Lisa.
Thank you very much, Suzanne, and I appreciate the opportunity to do this. It's a pleasure to speak with your group. I'm coming to you guys from upstate New York. I checked the temperature before coming on here, and it turns out you guys are colder than we are today, so go figure. But this is the time of year when people around here and kind of all over the United States start to think about their Irish ancestors, because we're getting toward the point where we're getting sick of winter and we're looking forward to spring, and spring means March, and March means St. Patrick's Day to those of us that have Irish ancestry. So it's sort of the time of year where we start to gravitate toward thinking about, well, maybe this is the year that I find out where my Irish ancestor came from in Ireland. This is kind of the burning question for any Irish family historian. A lot of us have a very difficult time trying to figure out exactly where in Ireland our ancestor came from. We're used to looking at so many records where the only thing that says for a place of birth, it just says Ireland and nothing more specific. And it can be incredibly frustrating. And I know that this is a question that I get asked an awful lot. And it's also something that I deal with on a daily basis. So I'm always using different websites. I'm always teaching myself different techniques, anything that I can do to help answer that question of where do your Irish ancestors come from? One thing I'm going to mention is that next month in March, I'm going to feature a different website every day on my Facebook page. And I've decided to focus on free websites that can be used for Irish genealogy. And so every day during March on my Facebook page, I'm going to post a link to a website that you might find helpful with your Irish research. And my Facebook page is called Upstate NY Genealogy by Lisa Dougherty. So if you go to Facebook and you like my page, you'll be able to see those links that I'm going to send out in March. And a lot of these links are links that I use personally and that I use all the time. So they're very useful links, and hopefully they'll be able to help you with your ancestry. So without further ado, let's see what we can do to maybe figure out a little bit about our Irish ancestors. So we all want to know their names. We all want to know when they came here. We all want to, after we get out of this COVID thing, be able to go to Ireland and actually walk on the soil where our ancestors lived. That's a really big thing for a lot of people. I know for me, it was a wonderful experience. Maybe we want to actually meet relatives that we still have in Ireland. However, we discover them either through knowing them through our family history or through our family traditions. Or maybe we want to know who they are through DNA, whatever means we have of figuring out who they are. Maybe we want to meet them in person. And I think after this, we're out of this whole pandemic thing, a lot of us are going to be very, very hungry for that type of experience. So in order to do that, we're really going to have some specifics. We're going to need to know where they came from. Okay. So one of the things that we really need when we're dealing with Irish genealogy is we really need to have a little bit of patience. Um, Patience is something that, not a lot of us have, and especially not in the digital age. A lot of us are we put our name into a box and we search, and we're used to instant gratification. Well, in Irish genealogy, instant really doesn't exist. It's something that you really have got to be patient. You've got to learn. You have to do tweaking. You have to do endless searches. Um, but it's all a matter of being persistent, keeping at it, trying every kind of resource that you can find, and really leaving no stone unturned. So at the beginning of our journey, we kind of look like this. We're going all off in different directions. We don't know exactly where we're going. But when we start doing a focused search and we start working with the records, then it's possible to have success. So what are some tips? What can we do to hopefully be successful in our quest for Irish ancestors? Well, of course, we always want to start with what we know already. It sounds kind of obvious, but starting with what you know really is going to help you fill in your pedigree chart, and it's really going to help ground you. It's going to help you start dealing with facts and not fiction. One of the things that the Irish are famous for are the tales, the stories. Sometimes those stories can be very fantastical. One of the more common stories that Irish people hear from their families is that there was a group of 3 or 4 brothers that all came over together, and one by one they disappeared and went somewhere else. Or another popular one is my ancestor was a stowaway on a ship. Or even more, my ancestor was part of the IRA and he had to leave Ireland. These are stories that are repeated over and over and over in families. But really, if you want to get at the truth of your Irish family, you really need to figure out what is truth and what is fiction. So start by filling out your pedigree chart in pencil with the things that you can verify: names, dates, places, anything you can get from your family members that you can verify as truth. Because we don't want to be led too far astray with information that's not accurate, because we can end up wasting a lot of time chasing down stories that are not going to help us in the long run. So you want to verify as much as you can what you know from your family. So of course we want to contact our relatives and we want to ask questions. We want to talk to our older relatives. We want to talk to aunts, uncles, cousins, people, maybe even people we haven't been in touch with in quite a while. But people that might be able to add something to what we don't know about our family. Sometimes these people have objects that belonged to family members. They have family Bibles, they have letters, they have diaries, they have things that we could consult. It's always worth asking whether, we may not know about those objects, but we're only going to find out about them if we ask. So it's a good idea to ask and to see what your ancestors may have out there. Another thing you want to do is you want to check your house for storage. You want to check your attic. You want to check those boxes that you've stuffed away in closets that might have family papers that you haven't seen in a long time. I know that my memory isn't the greatest, and a lot of times what will happen is people will hand me something at a family reunion, or they'll mail me something and I'll put it away in a box and I'll forget that I have it. So the only way for me to realize what I've got is to get out and actually look at it. So it's definitely something to, if you haven't checked your family storage recently, that's something for you to go in and maybe jar it up a little bit, unpack those boxes, look in those folders, see what you might have. Then, of course, there's something that we all do and that we all should be doing, especially during this time when we don't have access to outside resources, is using our online databases. And we know that online databases is kind of a slippery slope. There are things that we pay for, things that are free. We want to try to use as many free resources as we can, but sometimes we can't avoid paying for things. Of course, there are many, 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 many resources online to use. One of the best guides for for finding resources to use and in all kinds of categories is Cindy's List. I'm sure that you are all familiar with Cindy's List from Suzanne's classes. Cindy has her list broken into so many categories and a very large Irish category that's full of wonderful links. But don't also forget the more general links. You know, these are websites here on the screen that we are all familiar with. Find a Grave, newspapers.com, Family Search, all of these things that we use on a day-to-day basis. If you are not living in New York, or if you don't do research in New York, you might not be familiar with the one that's in the bottom right, the Old Fulton Postcard site. That is a website for newspapers that are predominantly from New York, but also some of the surrounding states, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Jersey. It's a wonderful site. It's absolutely 100% free to search. So if you're looking for ancestors in New York, I would highly recommend it. It's got a little bit of a strange interface. It takes a little bit of getting used to search it, but it's a wonderful resource. This gentleman, it's run by a private citizen, and he has more newspaper pages on his site than the Library of Congress does. So it's a wonderful resource for researching people in New York State. Of course, we know that there are a lot of free resources out there, but there are also pay resources. I usually advise people who ask me, well, is it worth it to sign up for Ancestry, or should I pay for my heritage or anything like that? My advice is usually, if you think you're going to spend quite a bit of time on your research, then sign up for a month or for 6 months. Do it for a limited amount of time so that you really gauge how much you're really going to use it. I'm not sure what's going on in Nevada, but here in New York, a lot of our libraries, since they are closed, are allowing access to Ancestry through their subscriptions for library card holders. So for example, I'm a library card holder of my local library, and they have access to Ancestry Library Edition. They are allowing remote access during this time when their library is closed. So that might be something that you could look into in your local area. Pay sites tend to be what I like to call one-stop shopping. Sometimes if you have a subscription, say to Ancestry, you can go to Ancestry and you can do a great deal of your research at that one place. What's going to happen eventually, though, is that eventually you're going to have to go into different resources other than just Ancestry, because everybody's research at some point goes into really local sources that Ancestry just doesn't cover, those really local sources. So it is, while sites like Ancestry and Family Search are good for overview and they're good for general resources, they're not as good for local and highly specialized type resources. And also their usage. We know that things like Ancestry and Family Search are fairly easy to use in the grand scheme of things. We can put a name in and we can search. Other type sites might not be as user-friendly. We may have to go through pages and pages of different things. But as genealogists, that's sort of what we do. We're hunting for buried treasure. So a lot of us are not daunted by the fact that we have to search through things page by page. But it's just another feature that some of the big websites that you pay for do have those features that allow you to search more easily. So really, it's kind of a personal choice. Is it possible to do an entire genealogy with free websites? Yes, probably. Is it going to be more work? Yes, definitely. But it just depends on what your motivation is and what you're looking for exactly. So the other thing to remember too is that not everything is online. Unfortunately, during this time period, we're kind of limited to what is online. I do know that sometimes if you have a specific thing that you're interested in looking for example, an obituary or something from a library that you know has this library, it doesn't hurt to email a librarian and to ask if they could do a lookup for you. I had that happen to me recently. I needed a obituary about it. Actually, I needed a newspaper article about an accident that happened in County Kerry in the 1940s. And so I contacted the librarian in County Kerry, and they sent me a copy of the article from the newspaper. So don't be afraid to write and ask. I would be as specific as possible with what you're looking for. Give dates, give exact page numbers, give names of books or newspapers, but it's worth a try. All they can do is say, no, we don't have time. So frequently used records. Okay, so what are we talking about when we talk about frequently used records when it comes to Irish ancestors? Well, of course, we're talking about the census. The census seems to be a backbone, kind of one of the most basic of records that everybody uses for everything. I always like to think of the census as a skeleton. It gives you a structure, it gives you a framework for your ancestors. It will give you names, it will give you approximate dates, it will give you sort of specific places. So you can use this information to go and look further. When I look at this particular entry for this person, this Timothy Sullivan, I am struck by this is something that I look for when I'm looking for information about Irish ancestors. Okay, so this person, Timothy Sullivan, and his wife Mary are both born in Ireland according to this census. But I looked at their list of children. They've got 4 children, Julia, Ellen, Mary, and Patrick. One of them is born in Ireland, the other 3 are born in Massachusetts. So to me, this is like a gold mine because I say, wow, I've got this couple, Timothy and Mary Sullivan. Their oldest child, Julia, was born in Ireland, and I know the approximate year because she was 8 years old. So now I can look her up, perhaps in Ireland, to try to find her baptism record because I know she was born there. So these are the kind of clues that I look for. I kind of look for couples that may have married in Ireland or had children born in Ireland, some maybe in Ireland, some in the United States. To me, that's a really good scenario, and the potential for finding out about their Irish roots is very good with this type of scenario. So that's where one example of how the census can help us. Whoops, going backwards here. Okay. Another thing too that sometimes gets overlooked is birth, marriage, and death records, and in some ways that seems sort of obvious, but in other ways it's not always obvious. Sometimes we overlook these records because they can be very difficult to access. In New York State, we have to be one of the more difficult states to access vital records in. What is available online for, say, Massachusetts or Vermont, we cannot get in New York State. We have to go through a lot of hoops, pay quite a bit of money to be able to access these records. But these records can be very useful. Most death records, most marriage records, birth records, all have spaces for parents' names. When you are going to look in Irish records, you've got to have the names of the parents of your Irish-born ancestor. It's not going to be enough to just have first names. You've got to have first and last name of both the mother and the father in order to go looking. So that's something that can be found on these records. So if you go looking for a death record, if you go looking for a marriage record, those records would have the names of your Irish ancestors' parents on them. Once you get that, then you have some more information to go look for a person in Ireland. Now, I don't know about you, but if I were looking for my ancestor, Patrick Murphy, in Ireland, I would feel much better about going to look for a Patrick Murphy whose parents' names I knew than a Patrick Murphy whose parents' names I didn't know. Because if you're seeing one Patrick Murphy, you're seeing hundreds. So you really need something that's going to distinguish your Patrick Murphy from the hundreds of others that were born in the same year. And I don't exaggerate when I say that. Another thing that can be very helpful with looking for Irish ancestors is to look at cemetery records, not only the records, but the stones as well. Here in the Northeast, one of the things that happens quite often is that Irish immigrants would put their place of origin on their gravestone. It was something that happens very frequently. And if you go walking around some of the cemeteries around here, you will see stones like this that have the county and the name of a parish or the name of the town on them already. Whether it's spelled right or not, that's a totally different story, but at least you are getting some sort of clue based on what is written on the stone. Conversely, there can also be information contained in cemetery records that are held in cemetery offices. Sometimes the churches have the cemetery records. Sometimes there's a separate office at the cemetery for the records. But these records can be sources of information. I have seen exact places of origin on them. So it is worth it to go to the trouble to try to get your hands on these records if they exist. Unfortunately, there is no uniformity when it comes to records for cemeteries or for anything, if it exists or not. It all depends on how things were taken care of, where they were stored, who was doing the record keeping. There's a lot of variables, but if you can get your hands on cemetery records, they can be very useful. Another thing I love about cemetery records is sometimes when you get a plot card and there's 8 or 10 people buried in the same plot and you don't know who some of them are, to me, that's a great day's detective work, is to sit there and try to figure out how are all these people related and can any of them offer clues to the origin of my ancestor. So that's just my wonderful geeky genealogy self speaking there. Newspapers are, I can't say enough good about newspapers. We just talked briefly about the Fulton History website. But newspapers can really give your research a boost, especially when it comes to Irish ancestors. A lot of times there will be biographical information about a place of origin. This can also be one of those things that just says Ireland, but sometimes you will get something more specific. In this particular case, we've got an obituary for Thomas Sheehan that tells us he was from County Kerry. And it also gives us the names of his parents, James Sheehan and Catherine Hogan. So that's really genealogy goldmine right there. So these things are worth looking into. The other thing that obituaries and newspaper notices can be really good for are associations, the sisters, the brothers, the cousins, the people that are mentioned in these obituaries. If there's nothing out there about your ancestor, it's always a good idea to start building a family for him. Build out his siblings, build out his aunts and uncles. You may be able to find some information about those people that you're not able to find out about your own ancestor. So that's definitely the way to research Irish people, is to expand the tree beyond your immediate ancestor. Immigration records. I was a former volunteer at the National Archives, and one of the most popular things that people wanted to find out about when they visited our facility was they wanted to see their ancestor on a passenger list. Well, it can be quite exciting. More often than not, though, I find passenger lists to be kind of a letdown. They generally don't have a lot of information on them. And being able to tell your ancestor from the hundreds of other people that have the exact same name is a problem that we deal with quite frequently when it comes to Irish immigrants. Names are very common. The Irish did not have a lot of imagination when it came to first names. So in one family, it's not uncommon to have multiple people of the same name. So it's very difficult to tell from a passenger list alone who your ancestor is. You've got to have good information about when they came over, possibly who they came over with. If they came over in a family group, they're going to be a lot easier to spot than if they came over singly, individually, or with just people that you can identify. So keeping that in mind, when you go to search passenger lists, the more information you have going in, the better your results are going to be. That being said, I would have to say over 25 years of researching Irish immigrants, I probably find people on passenger lists well less than 50% of the time. So it's not a normal thing for me to have people on passenger lists when I do a research project. It doesn't happen very often. So it's kind of an interesting find when it does. That being said, passenger lists are rarely, especially the earlier ones, are rarely a good source of a place of origin. After about 1900, you do get a lot more information on a passenger list than you would get before 1900. So in that case, you may possibly be able to find information about places of origin. But prior to that, not a lot of information at all. So it can be very frustrating to find something and not be able to see what you're looking for on them. Okay. So what about online family trees? Well, As of right now, and over the last few years, these online family trees have been growing. There's a lot of them. People make them for all sorts of purposes. Um, and the thing with the online family trees is that they really ought to be used as clues only. A lot of times what you will find when you look at an online family tree is you will find a lot of information, but you won't find any sources for that information. So to me, that makes it kind of problematic. If there are no sources, how can we judge the quality of the information in the family tree? We really can't. Really, what we're seeing is something that's either someone has entered without sourcing it or something that someone has taken from someone else's family tree. And the problem is that the bad information gets copied over and over and over again, so we don't know where it originated. So there's a lot of problems associated with online family trees. I tend to steer clear of them. If I happen to find a good one that's got some sources, I might reach out to the person. But generally, it's a good practice and good ideas to only use an online family tree as a cautionary thing. We all know the saying, just because it's online doesn't make it true. So you really want to be careful when it comes to online family trees. Okay, another tip, and this is a really important tip, I think. It's to be organized. You want to stay organized. You want to know where you're getting information from. You want to write down your information. There may come a time when you want to either talk to a professional or hire a professional or go to a workshop where someone's going to be able to help you individually. One of the best things you can do for yourself in that situation is to have your information organized so that you can access it. So if you make an appointment with Suzanne to do a virtual genealogy consultation with her, and you go on and you have a certain amount of time that she's available to answer your questions, you want to make sure that you've got a list of questions, that you've got the basic information that you already have. You want to make sure you have all of that organized and ready for her, because you need to make the most of your time with her. You don't want to spend your 30 minutes with her shuffling through papers looking for something. So the best thing to do is to stay organized. When you find a piece of information, record it. Make sure you know where you found it, what type of thing it was in, whether it was on an online record, whether it was from ancestry.com, whether it was from a book you're reading. It would probably be even helpful to write down the date that you found it. One of the things that I did when I was a beginning genealogist was I was so excited to get information that I would just rip through the newspapers and make copies of things. And I never bothered to write down the dates or the names of the newspapers. Well, I can tell you 15, 20 years later, I find these things in manila folders, and I'm so mad at myself for not writing down the dates. So don't get mad at yourself sometime in the future. Stay organized today and develop those good habits when you're starting out. Find a system that you like and stick with it. You can use online or offline software. So you can make a tree in Ancestry, or you can make a tree in Roots Magic. You can print out charts or forms from the internet and do that way. You can put all of your information in binders or folders, one binder or one folder for each family. Keep track of your sources so you don't go back 5 years later and search the same book that had 500 pages that you already searched. So all of these things are basically just a matter of practicality. Okay, only deal with the facts. We did talk about this earlier, about the stories. Everybody's got a story like this in their family. But what you want to do is you want to look at that story. You want to really pick it apart. You want to see if there are some elements of that story that might actually be fact. I find that in stories, there tends to be a little bit of fact in some of them. One of the things that I notice, and this happens quite often, is that I probably, out of every 10 Irish ancestors that I investigate, probably 5 say that they're from County Cork. And I think one of the reasons for that is that many of the ships that left Ireland left from County Cork. So maybe the question is kind of misinterpreted. Where did you come from in Ireland? Oh, I got on the boat in County Cork, so that's where I came from. That's a literal answer to that question. But what your job as a family historian is to pick through these family stories and think of things that may be plausible. Look at the parts of the story that may actually be factual. I tend to think of things that if they're less generic, then they tend to be more factual. So if someone says, oh, my ancestry came from Leitrim, that's not a county that you hear about every day. That's not a county that somebody just pulls out of the top of their head. So there may be some fact in that story. Stories about different landforms or different people or different things that you can verify. That's what you want to look for in a family story, and leave the generic kind of behind. Okay, now get ready for the soapbox lecture. We're going to talk about spelling. I'm sure that Suzanne has had many lessons about spelling in her time with offering genealogy classes, and Irish genealogy really is no exception to that spelling issue. This gentleman is John Grenham. He is he's probably the best well-known Irish genealogist working today. He's got a bunch of videos on YouTube about different aspects of Irish genealogy. And if you want to listen to him talk, he's got a wonderful Irish accent, and talk about his different aspects of Irish genealogy. I highly recommend it. But I love this quote that he has written in one of his blog posts, because it really sums up the information about what we need to think about when we think about names. So I'll just read it. It says, in sum, one of the biggest obstacles to successful research in Irish records is the lack of appreciation of the extraordinary variation in the written records of Irish surnames. They are unimaginably slippery. And what he means by that is that names can be spelled all different ways. There are so many variations to even some of the simplest Irish names that, people say, oh, well, I know the name Kelly, I know the name Murphy. We see those names all over the place. Well, even the simplest names are subject to spelling variations. And we know the reasons for this. We know illiteracy, the priest was writing really quickly, or the person didn't, had a very heavy accent. We know that there are so many different reasons. Add to that abbreviations that are known only locally. Add to that local variations in names, all kinds of different ways of spelling. So we really need to be very loose with how we interpret spelling. Okay, so one of the things I like to show people is these 3 records. These 3 records are allegedly for the same person. All 3 records have a different last name on them, or what we would consider a different last name. The top record is a baptism record, and the surname is Phelan, spelled Phelan. The second record is from a census record, and the surname is Fallon, Fallon. And the third record is from a city directory, and the name is Whalen, Whalen. Well, all 3 of these records are referring to the same person, this Matthew Whalen, Fallon. They're all recorded by different people at different times, and obviously with different spellings. So if you were looking for Matthew Fallon, or Whalen, what spelling would you look for his name under? Would you recognize that all of these people are the same person? Or would you be thrown off by the fact that this name is so different? This is something that we really have to be aware of when we're looking through Irish records. These 3 records that I'm showing you here happen to be American records. These are not even Irish records. So once we get over to Ireland, we're dealing with another whole set of people, circumstances, places, differing levels of education. We're dealing with a lot of different factors here. So we really need to be extremely loose when we think of names. Spellings are not standardized, ever, for any names, not for first names, not for surnames, not for place names. Place names are incredibly difficult to deal with in Ireland. There are so many different spellings for place names, it will drive you crazy. One of the things that can be helpful is if you keep a log of spelling variations for your surname of interest. That will help you to recognize those names. John Grenham on his website is called Irish Ancestors. He has a little space where you can plug in your name and it will show you where in Ireland that name comes from. And it will also give you a very large list of variations that are used in Irish records. So that's a really helpful thing for you to keep track of. The other thing is that there are a lot of nicknames associated with Irish first names. Some are obvious, like we know Peggy for Margaret, or Minnie for Mary, or things like that. But some that might not be so obvious, Delia is a nickname for Bridget, or Eugene and Owen are used interchangeably. Those are things that you just learn with experience. So those are another thing that you should become familiar with, are the different nicknames. Naming patterns in Ireland are of extreme importance. If you don't know your Irish ancestors, immigrant ancestors' father's name, look at what he named his eldest son. And better than half the times, that is his father's name. There were strict naming patterns that were traditionally upheld in the Irish community. The oldest son was named for the paternal grandfather. The next oldest son was named for the maternal grandfather. The third son was named for the father. You would be surprised how many times this is actually working and actually is accurate. So many times, if you have no other source for your Irish immigrant ancestor's father's name, it's going to be whatever he named his oldest son. So that's something that if I were a betting person, I would put money on. So pay attention to those naming patterns. They can be very important. And here is the actual naming pattern. The daughters, I find, are not as rigidly adhered to as the sons. However, you will almost always find the grandmother's names among the female names in the family. So if you have a fairly uncommon name, or what I would consider an uncommon name in Irish families, like maybe Julia or Judith or Anastasia or something like that, that's probably going to be a family name. So those more unusual names you will definitely notice. So Ireland, get to know Ireland a little bit. This is always going to help you with your research. There are many place names, and there's no way that anybody could memorize all of them. But if you know the names of the counties, then you're in a head start. So that's a good thing. There are Roman Catholic parishes. There are civil parishes. They are not the same thing. They may sometimes have the same names, but they are not the same thing. The civil parishes are roughly equivalent to the old Church of Ireland parishes, and you can see there are many more of those than there are Catholic parishes. And then on the lowest level, there are 60,000 townlands on an island that's the size of the state of Indiana. So this is a pretty small area with over 60,000 townland names. A lot of them are repeated, and they are also repeated within counties, which can make things even crazier, but you do get used to it. Okay. This is a very important tip. You need to know the limitations of Irish records. Those of you that have German or French Canadian ancestors and are thinking about how you can go all the way back to the 1600s, you can forget that with Irish ancestors. Most of us are lucky if we can get back to the beginning of the 19th century. That's a reality for us with Irish ancestors. The printed and paper records are very sparse before that time, and there's not a lot of different record sets to use. A story that I like to tell is about Bill Clinton here. When Bill Clinton visited Ireland in the 90s, of course, they had the professional genealogist working on his mother's family tree. And, you know, one of the things they like to do with American presidents is they like the American presidents to go to Ireland and go to their ancestral homeland. And so they tried to find this ancestor for Bill Clinton, and unfortunately, they were not able to do so before his trip. So the moral of the story here is that if Bill Clinton's genealogist can't find his ancestors, then hopefully you'll have better luck than he did. So it just goes to show you Irish ancestry and Irish genealogy is not easy. So there is some good news. The good news is that nearly all of the basic Irish records are online. So if you hear somebody say to you, oh, I need to go to Dublin so I can go and research my ancestor. Well, you don't really need to go to Dublin unless your ancestor was from Dublin. All of the basic records used for Irish genealogy are all online. So any census records from Ireland, which are extremely limited, any vital records, any Catholic parish records, those are all online. There are also a couple of land record sets that are also online. So that's the good news. A lot of the most basic research can be done right from your own home. So what happens here? Here's my scenario. My ancestor John Murphy was born in Ireland in 1842. I'm ready to search the Irish records. Well, if you go into the Irish Catholic registers on Ancestry and you search for a John Murphy born in 1842, well, you can see that your search results bring back 216 of them. And that's with the exact year, 1842. So imagine weeding through all 216 of these without having further information. So really, you do need more information than just a name and an approximate date. Of course, we don't know where John Murphy was born. We don't know his parents' names. We also don't know if John was actually born in 1842. We don't know how John Murphy's surname will be spelled in the record. And another thing we don't know is we don't know if the records for the parish where John was born actually exist for the time period when he was born. So you can see you've got to have more background information before you go searching. So here are some of the more common names. And of course, a lot of them are very common, but these are some of the ones that we see over and over and over again. And again, definitely be aware that you are going to see spelling variations for all of them. The O's and the Macs, be very careful of those too, because they were not always used. You will see O'Brien as just Brian. You will see O'Shea as just Shay. The O's and the Macs are not uniformly used. Sometimes you'll see them on a record, other times you won't see them on a record. It varies widely. So don't think that the person that's named Michael Bryan is not your ancestor just because it doesn't say O'Brien. It could very well be your ancestor. So you do need a lot of specific information before you can search Irish records effectively. It's probably the best practice is to find everything that you can find in the United States or in the country that your ancestor immigrated to before you start looking in Irish records, because there is nothing in Irish records that point you to America, but there should or may be some things in American records that will point you to Ireland. So that's really how you have to look at it. It doesn't work from Ireland to here. It only works from here to Ireland. So here are some of those basic records that I was talking about that are available. The 1901 and 1911 census. Those are the only census records that survive for the entire island of Ireland. There are some fragments from the 19th century, but they're so few that they're not even really worth looking at. Vital records, which means records of birth, marriage, and death, are available online from 1864 to the 1950s. Roman Catholic parish records, most of the ones available are online. Protestant records are another story. There is a project at the moment underfoot to get those Protestant records that survived the 1922 fire to be digitized and put online. That's a long-term project, but hopefully that'll get working on very soon. There are land records from the 19th century in Ireland, such as Griffith's valuation, which can tell you exactly where your Irish ancestor lived, if you can figure out which Patrick Murphy he is. Websites. These are some websites that are deal with Irish genealogy. Some of them are pay websites, some of them are free. It just depends on what you're looking for. For example, National Library of Ireland has the Irish parish records for the Catholic Church available, and they are free. The National Archives of Ireland has the census records, and they are free. irishgenealogy.ie has the civil registration, and it is free. So all of those things are free. Help is available. There are videos, there are online classes, they are all over the place. YouTube is a great resource for all kinds of information about any kind of genealogy, but certainly about Irish genealogy. Ancestry, Family Search, Find My Past all have video classes about how to search their databases. Family Search will have information about Irish genealogy in general, how to do it. They have some really good resources there. Don't overlook YouTube for sure. John Grenham's channel on YouTube, I would highly recommend that. Irish Genealogy Toolkit is a great how-to website. This is put on by a lady in Ireland, Claire Santry. She has all kinds of information about records that you would use for Irish genealogy. So if you don't know what Griffith's valuation is, you can go to the Irish Genealogy Toolkit and figure out what it is and where to access it. So this is a really good website for how-tos. How do I find out something? Where do I find civil registration? It's a good directional type of website. Social media. Social media is a great place for genealogy. Facebook kind of gets a lot of bad press, but Facebook has got wonderful resources for genealogy. There are thousands of Facebook groups for genealogy. The Irish Genealogy Facebook group is very well monitored. There are lots of wonderful questions asked and answered on that group. It's a wonderful thing to do to get involved with that group. There is a website called Ireland XO, which is a place where you can put information about ancestors that you're looking for information about on specific areas of Ireland. So that's a really wonderful place to get information from the local area. Also, ancestry message boards, you can take advantage of those. And you can also ask me questions. At the moment, I don't have in-person volunteer opportunities, of course, but my website is up. It's www.upstatenygenealogy.com. And also I mentioned my Facebook page earlier, which is Upstate NY Genealogy by Lisa Dougherty. If you have any questions at all, feel free to send me a message. I'd be very happy to answer any questions that you have. So, do we have any questions, that being said?
Okay, I will ask the class to go ahead and either unmute your microphone, or if you prefer, go ahead and put it in the chat. And while I'm waiting for that, I've got a few things I've kind of jotted down during your presentation.
Sure.
You mentioned ancestry.com being accessible from home from many libraries. Unfortunately, in Northern Nevada, most libraries do not have access to ancestry.com, unfortunately. I know I came from California 4 years ago, and in California, I don't think there's a single public library that doesn't have ancestry.com, but unfortunately in Northern Nevada, most of them do not. However, I wanted to let the class know that the Nevada State Library in Carson City does offer it for free. So that might be something you might want to follow up directly with them about. Also, you mentioned New York State records. You know, you're at a distinct disadvantage when you're trying to get vital records from New York. I wanted to share with you that has been the most frustrating state I've ever dealt with to get vital records from.
You're singing my song, yes.
Yeah, I mean, not only are they probably the most expensive one to get records from, but a typical wait for a vital record is about 8 months.
Oh,
So,
and it's longer now.
Oh, is it longer now? Wow.
Yeah, there's somebody actually on, speaking of Facebook groups, there's a New York State genealogy Facebook group, and there's someone who's tracking response times to requests. And there are people that are well over 2 years, myself included.
Wow, that is amazing.
So the trick with New York is that if you want to get a vital record from New York, you need to get it from the community where the event happened. So for example, a couple of weeks ago, I had a client that had someone that died in Troy, New York, and I sent a request to the city of Troy, New York, and they sent me the death record within a week.
Oh, wow. What a great.
Yeah, so you do need to do a little bit of investigating. I would do something like if your place is Troy, you would put in Google Troy, New York City clerk, and you would find either the village or town or city clerk for that municipality, and you would write to them, and it's still going to cost you $22, but at least you'll get it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would happily pay more to get it sooner. I know some lineage societies, especially when it comes to New York now, like most lineage societies for the first 3 generations want birth, marriage, and death records. But when it
Yes,
comes to New York, some lineage societies are now allowing substitute records like obits and such like that,
I believe
uh,
it.
just
I
because New
believe
York,
it.
New York is just almost impossible to work with.
It is, but it is a little bit of a workaround. I can't speak for all of the municipalities. Some of them probably won't respond. But I think by law, if you send money, they do have to respond in some way. But they're going to be better than the state. Let's just put it that way.
Gotcha. Okay, good advice. Now you mentioned the Fulton History website.
Yes.
That link is on my LibGuide that I talk
Oh,
to my
good.
class about every week.
Excellent.
However, if you don't mind, maybe telling them, I know that there are 2 ways you can access Fulton, 2 different websites, one
Yes.
directly with them.
Yeah, the one is not, it's not like, I think it's called Fulton Search. And I'm not sure why he's got that up there. I think because if his site is down, and it tends to get hacked a bit. So if his site is down, that site won't work either. So I'm not sure what the protocol is there. Maybe it's just to have a little bit of a different interface to search, because the one is a little wacky, as we all know. But I'm used to the wacky one now, so I don't even bother with the other one. But it just, I guess it's just to have an alternative search site. I'm not 100% sure why he's got it like that.
It's funny. I don't use the alternative website either, because I've learned, to use the advanced search functions in the
Exactly.
original one. And you're right, it's quirky as all get out, but it's certainly a wonderful website.
It sure
I'm
is.
on it
Yes.
all the time.
Yes.
And you're right, they have been hacked quite a bit. But I would encourage the class, if you're looking for free newspaper articles from New York or on the New York area, around New York, and in the surrounding states. I've noticed he's expanded his titles quite a bit over
Yes.
the last few years, to go ahead and use the website. And they also have a Facebook page, by the way,
Yes.
because they do get hacked so often, and the website does go down. It's good if you go to their Facebook page and like it, because then you can keep up with the updates of what's going on.
Exactly. Yes. It's good
And
to be
then,
notified, because that's something I use on a daily basis. And if I go there and it's down, I'm like, ah, darn.
I know, I get up in the middle of the night sometimes when they're having problems with it, and now
Yeah.
they're restricting how many they'll let hit the server at one time, because
Yes.
they've been hacked so often. And
Yeah.
as a result, sometimes the only time you can get on is 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
And then you mentioned to the class about how important it is to stay organized. That is probably the most common question I get, when I assist people, is how do I stay organized? I mean, and I always laugh, because organization is something I've been struggling with on a day-to-day basis for
We all
20
do. We all
years.
do.
I mean, it is probably the hardest part of doing genealogy, is staying organized. But you know what they say about staying organized? If you're not organized, like most people aren't, going back and organizing is well worth the time, because 2 sets of eyes on a document at 2 separate times is better than one.
Absolutely.
Because there's been times where I went back, and because I wasn't organized like I wanted to be, and I started looking back at documents, and I noticed there was something in the document that I didn't notice before.
Absolutely.
So
Yes. So it is, it's good to go back and organize. It's good to go back and look, because you will maybe see something you didn't see the first time around. So definitely it's a good idea.
yeah, I have a tendency, at least in my own madness to my genealogy methods, I have a tendency to let things pile up, because I go from one thing to another really quickly.
Sure.
And as a result, my filing really suffers. And I have a tendency, usually after I find out I wasted like hours and hours with the research that I didn't need to do, because I didn't pay attention to something I didn't file correctly. The
Absolutely.
one thing I've learned is that, at least twice a year, I have to set aside a whole day or maybe 2 days where I do nothing but file, just to catch up on, because I just jump from one project to the other so often.
Yes. Well, the worst is, when here in New York, as we just said, that when you are getting vital records and you're paying $22 a piece for them, you want to make sure you know where they are, because you don't want to send for them again.
That's definitely true. Definitely. Now you mentioned all the different types of systems that one could have. And I wanted to point out that since I work with, the lab people here in the lab every week, they are all on, some are working online, some are working offline.
Yep.
Some are working with paper,
Yep.
and they're all wonderful systems. It's just really what works for you, correct?
Exactly. Very personal choice. And there's no right way or wrong way. It just is whatever you're comfortable with.
Absolutely. And I'm happy to work with them no matter what their system is.
Exactly.
Because
Yep.
I myself started with paper and then went to completely online as time went on.
I do
But I
everything.
myself, I
So,
still have a lot of paper as a result of that.
so do I.
And then you talked about oral history stories. I know in my own family, two really often retold stories I was able to debunk.
Yes,
So, I mean, oral history is certainly open to interpretation.
absolutely.
Now you mentioned that there was a website that talked about name variations, but what
Yes.
about you? You mentioned that place names are often have name, spelling variations. Is there a place for place names that you can look up?
There is, I mean, it's kind of, I go back and forth with this. I have a tab of my favorite websites that is nothing but place name locator tools. That's all it is. And there's probably 20 or 30 links in it. The problem is that when you get down to a small area in Ireland, there's going to be a lot of spelling variations based on who's writing the thing, who's, even within a particular area, there are going to be spelling variations. So one thing I can recommend is there's a guy named Shane Wilson. He has a website. It's swilson.info, and he has got different databases in there where you can put a partial name in and a county, and it will give you a list to choose from.
Oh, that's good to know. Okay.
So that sort of thing is some of the things I use. And then sometimes I'll go in and I'll use a spelling from something like a baptism record or something and look in Google Maps and see if it's there. And then maybe if it's not there, I'll go to Shane Wilson's site and I'll look there. But there are a lot of Irish mapping websites out there. Probably Cindy's List has got them all on there, I would think.
You know what I did one time? I was looking up a Norwegian ancestor and I couldn't find the name of the town on a map or even on an online map for that matter. I called the embassy and they knew right away what I was talking about.
Wow.
So there's a little clue, if you can't find the right spelling to match it on a map, call the embassy as well.
That's a great idea. I never would have thought of that.
Yeah, I was really thankful because they knew exactly what it was.
I was volunteering at the National Archives. There was a book that we used to use there for Eastern Europe, and it was called Where Once We Walked. And it was about settlements, Jewish settlements and other settlements in Eastern Europe that had disappeared since the Holocaust. And it was a great reference book. And I don't know a lot about Eastern European genealogy, but we would use it when we would come across a name of something on a passenger list or something that no one could make out. We would try to figure out what it said, and then we would go to that book to see if we could find any kind of reference as to where it might be now, like in what country and that kind of thing. So I always found that book to be a really great resource for that particular part of the world.
I'm going to see if I can find it for our library.
Yeah, it was an excellent resource. Yes.
Okay, now for the class, if you want to ask a question, please just unmute your microphone. Don't turn on your camera because we are recording. So unless you want your picture to be recorded, it's completely up to you, but I just want to let everyone know we are recording. So if you have a question, if you want to turn on your camera, please do so. But if you don't want to turn on your camera, just unmute yourself. Okay, go ahead, Patricia. Go ahead and unmute your microphone.
Hi.
Hi.
The question I have, I don't have a lot of resources on my father's side, which is Lynch.
Uh-huh.
And although I do know it was my grandfather who came over, but what I heard was that it would be my great grandfather. Yeah. What I heard was that he came on the coffin ships, and that they called them. And I don't think what I heard was that they didn't really keep records. People just came down and got on the ships, those real early ones. So do you have any resource? And he ended up in Boston, Massachusetts.
I guess it would depend on what year. Generally, there are passenger lists that exist back to the beginning of the 19th century. They're not terribly complete. If you're looking for a Lynch, there's probably going to be hundreds.
Right.
You know, you'd have to, probably the best way to do it would be to try to find him in the census records and see if there's any clue from the census records as to when he may have arrived here. And then from there, maybe try to find a naturalization record, because sometimes those can offer clues as to when a person arrived here. So that might be the best way to proceed to try to find him on a passenger list. Depending on when, if it was before, say, about 1880 or so, there's probably not a great chance, but it just depends on the circumstances. It depends on if he came over by himself or if he came over with other people that you can identify. It's kind of a losing battle in a way.
Yeah.
It's not a very fulfilling search, I can tell you that.
Okay, well then I won't be too disappointed.
I just want to ask you if you happened to see the Henry Louis Gates program this past Tuesday,
No.
Finding Your Roots.
No.
Because one of the people that they had profiled on there was actress named Jane Lynch.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so she, her grandfather, I believe, was the one that came over from Ireland. So they talked quite a bit about him and his origins. So you might want to check that out. That would probably be very interesting.
Finding Your Roots. Okay.
That's
Well,
on
and then-
PBS.
Okay, PBS. Okay. And then somebody was born in the Irish Free State.
Yes. So Irish Free State simply means that the only place you're going to find that is in the 1930 census. That is because that was meant to differentiate the newly formed Irish Republic from Northern Ireland. So in 1922 was when Ireland was split between Northern Ireland and the Irish Free State. So Northern Ireland would be the 6 counties in Northern Ireland, and then the Irish Free State would be the 26 counties in the southern part of the island. So that's what that means. So that ancestor was born in one of the 26 counties. So the good news is you got it narrowed down to 26 counties.
26. There we go. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, Karen, go ahead and unmute your microphone.
Hi, my mother's cousin created or found out a line from Brian Baruma, who was born in 941. He was the High King of Ireland, all the way to my grandfather, 29 generations, I guess. I don't see any documentation. She's no longer alive. Can that be proven?
Probably not.
No. It's
Again, probably best practice to start with your grandfather and work backwards.
right.
So
yeah.
start with him and then go backwards, verify who his parents are, and then verify who their parents are. And that's generally the best practice. There's a lot of trees on Ancestry that go back to Brian Baru, and probably none of them are factual.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, anybody else? Go ahead and either raise your virtual hand or just unmute your microphone and go ahead and ask your question. Kevin, go ahead.
Sue, I'm just looking, the coffin ships were the ships during the famine.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. That would probably be the era that they would have been talking about.
And Kevin's been generous. He's buying some books for our library on the Irish famine. Him and I have had a couple meetings over the last couple of weeks on his Irish ancestors.
Oh, great.
So Kevin, any breakthroughs on your tree lately?
No, none. We know how difficult it is.
Slow going.
Yeah. No, and I do have, there's a Facebook page that I go to. The administrator there has been very helpful, and it's for County Donegal, where my ancestors are from.
Excellent. Yeah, there's a lot of good resources. I mean, I find the Facebook groups to be very helpful. There's a lot of them that are very helpful.
Kevin, did you want to share the name of that Facebook page specifically in case anybody else has ancestors from that area?
Well, the one you have to actually prove you're related to them. So I won't share that one, but I think Donegal genealogy, well, I think you need to prove relation to that too. Donegal genealogy. I don't go on that one as often. Let me see.
A lot of them you can just ask to join, and they have to approve you or something. They usually ask like a superficial question or something like, do you have ancestors from Donegal? And then if you just say yes, and they'll approve you to enter. So that's usually the way it is. Depends on the group though.
Yeah, you have to request.
Yes, you have to make a request. Yeah, because a lot of them are closed groups. They're not, public.
Yeah,
And
this
they don't
one.
get as many hackers that way.
Yeah, this one, Donegal Genealogy Resources, and someone in Ireland was telling me that there was a Facebook update last year that I don't think we had over here, and that actually, this Donegal Genealogy site lost most of their members.
Oh boy.
So they're starting all over again, trying to get those members back.
Oh wow, that's too bad.
Okay, we got a question. Let's see here. Karen already asked that question. Okay, Linda wants to know, ordered a death record from about 1937 in July of 2019. They cashed the check in 2019 and I am still waiting. I have the obits, copies of cemetery record, but the New York State people are useless.
You'll get no argument from me. I think I'm still waiting for one from July of 2018.
Wow.
If you go on the New York Genealogy Facebook page, there's a gentleman on there who's keeping track of people's wait times, and there's a whole spreadsheet on there of how long people have waited.
Wow. Yeah, like I said, I recently was helping somebody get a DAR application, and I went to bat for her with DAR, saying, look, you don't want to wait for this person to become a member for 2 years. Let me find substitutes, and they accepted the substitutes.
That's great. That's really great. And I think I even read something recently about they're starting to accept DNA as part of their proof, at least in some cases, and especially like for the people that you would need your records for, your marriage records, your death records. DNA could help in that area because it's so recent, so I don't know. It's useless.
And Sharon, I see you just turned on your camera. Did you have a question?
Yes, my partner here is going to ask a question.
Okay.
Regarding online addresses and all that, the tail end of that, would that be .com or .ie or sometimes either?
It depends on the site. I think that it depends on what you're looking at. A lot of times I just will Google the name of the website, and then it'll come up and I'll be able to click on it that way. But it doesn't necessarily have to be IE. It could be .com. Just depends on the website that you're talking about.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Monica just posted in the chat box, my Scottish Irish came through Canada. Can you point me to Canadian immigration records?
Those are few and far between. You can try looking on Library and Archives Canada website. They have some immigration records, but generally they don't tend to be as extensive as the United States ones are. And the United States ones I don't think are extensive at all, but the Canadian ones are even less so. And I'm not sure if it was because Canada was a British territory, just like Ireland was a British territory. So maybe they were a little looser with the back and forth than they were in the United States. But their immigration records are not good. They're very, very few.
Good to know. Now, I know I do collection development for genealogy here in our library. And I try to always, before I buy a book for our book collection, I always try to go into ancestry.com and familysearch.org to check the books that they have digitized there.
Yes.
Before I buy, so I don't waste money on something that's already been digitized. Are there digitized books on ancestry.com or Family Search that you're aware of that might be like good starting points for the class?
Oh boy, I don't know. Not sure. That's a good question. I usually tend to use the digitized books more as things like local history books or printed family genealogies, which in the world of Irish genealogy, there's not a heck of a lot of those out there. But what I tend to use them more for is local history. So back in the late 19th century, a lot of the counties in the United States had a thing for publishing local history. And in those local histories, they would put things like biographies of their leading citizens or, different types of people that were historic in settlement of the town. And you'd be surprised how many places of origin can be found from those resources. Because sometimes what happens is a person who lives in New York has brothers or, children that go west and they settle somewhere and they found they have a town, they're a founder of a town somewhere, and their little biography in this history book will say his father came from so and so County Donegal, and you'd be shocked how many times I've found places of origin in that way. So those kinds of things I find to be very helpful, but I don't know of anything specific off the top of my head. Reference books, definitely, reference books that detail the type of information that you can expect to find in Ireland, like John Grenham's Your Irish Ancestors book, things like that.
That was actually my next question, because I am going to be putting in a new book order here pretty quickly. Are there certain books that you would recommend for our book collection on this topic over others?
Well, definitely anything by John Grenham. He's got basically a definitive book about the records that are available for use, and it gets down to a pretty local level. So that's a really good book to have. There's also an author called Chris Payton. He has books about researching your Irish ancestors online. That's a really good book. He's also got a book called Irish Land Records, which I've been trying to get my hands on for a couple of years now, and I can't find it anywhere. So if you can find it, then. But he's also a good author.
Are both of these authors still alive? Are they still publishing, or are these?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. So they're both still in copyright.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. That gives me a clue of where not to look.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Any other suggestions for book purchases?
Interesting. I know that there's a really good book by a gentleman named Joseph Buggy. It's about finding your Irish ancestor in New York City. That's a book I use quite often. It has the addresses and contact information for all the Roman Catholic parishes in the 5 boroughs. So that's quite a huge undertaking there. But it also has a lot of references to different types of records that people use for the New York City metropolitan area. And a lot of ancestors that came to the United States started in New York, whether they went somewhere else after that. But a lot of them landed in New York and maybe spent a little bit of time there. So that's certainly something that would be a good resource.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay. So any other questions from let me check that chat box one more time.
I have a question.
Linda, hold on just one second. Linda just posted, she found the latest edition of Where Once We Walked on Amazon, and she already ordered it.
Oh, yay, good.
She's gonna donate it to our library. Thank you, Linda.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a wonderful book.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead. Who is Catherine?
Yeah, it's Catherine. Yes, I have a question. I have a relative that goes back to the early 1800s. Last name was Hagen. And Patrick Hagen, it looks like he arrived in the United States, possibly via Philadelphia. And there was a reference from a notice from the Shamrock newspaper of New York. I have a volume, a date, and I guess it's a published date for this book, Accumulated Notices, and a page, and it's by John Devereux Kernan. Have you ever heard of anything like this?
I have not. I've not heard of that particular publication. There are exclusively Irish publications. There were some in New York. There were some in Boston. Those a lot of times are available for searching I know Fulton History has one of the Irish papers. I know that newspapers.com has it. The Boston Pilot, there's also databases for searching the Boston Pilot. And I know the Boston Pilot had a nationwide circulation. So a lot of times you can find information about Irish people in the Boston Pilot, even if they didn't live in the Boston area, they will still appear in the newspaper. I have not heard of the Shamrock though. It's interesting.
Yeah, it was called Notices from the Shamrock Papers of New York. And they had partial lists of people that had come in. But this reference was, they came via Philadelphia, but this family was really established in New York.
That's interesting.
So, well, thank you. I'll continue to
I
look
would do
for
a little
this.
bit more research on the Shamrock publications themselves and see if there's any online source to be able to access them. Sometimes those types of newspapers, the ethnic newspapers, can be accessed through universities. So that might be something that, maybe there's a university out there that has a collection from those newspapers and they have it digitized, only nobody knows where it is. So you kind of have to do a little digging to be able to find it.
Or is there, they would have it in New York, wouldn't they?
Well,
A university
possibly,
in New York, yeah.
possibly.
Okay.
It's just hard to tell where these things kind of end up. So maybe even like WorldCat or something like that to look there to see if anybody's got a collection from that particular newspaper.
You know where, Lisa, where another great place besides WorldCat might be to look? Try Archive Grid.
Oh, yes. Okay. Definitely.
I
But
think
there's got to be something out there.
Well, the search is always fun, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's fun if you find something, but.
Thank you.
Good question, Catherine. Okay, class, go ahead and once again, either post your question in the chat box or unmute your microphone. Oh, okay, hold on. Linda just wrote down, oh boy, Linda's really on it today. Okay, Linda says, according to Wikipedia, the Times Shamrock Communications is an American media company based in Scranton, Pennsylvania. The company owned by Lynette and Haggerty families of Scranton lists among its assets 4 daily newspapers, 6 weekly newspapers, and 9 radio stations. Most of its properties are in northeastern Pennsylvania. So if you want to look at that Wikipedia article, you can certainly go ahead and type that in.
Which would be close to New York, northeastern Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Linda. What a great piece of information. Okay, anybody else? All right, I just wanted to say, if there's no other questions, I'll give it just a few more seconds. If there's no other questions, I wanted to say to Lisa, thank you once again for joining us and giving us your expertise and your time. It's greatly appreciated. And also thank you very much for allowing us to record today. We'll be posting this on our YouTube channel, probably in the next week or two, and I will send you the link. And with that, let's see here, hold on. Okay, I think that's it. No other questions in the chat box. Give the class just a few more seconds. Everyone's saying thank you.
You're very welcome. It was a pleasure as always.
Okay, looks like there's no other questions. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Just 1 second here. Let me stop the recording.